Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending, and we greatly appreciate it. I am Siobhan Andrews, student president of the new University of Arizona Global Campus Women in STEM organization. As an information technology student here, I am thrilled to say that the University of Arizona Global Campus Women in STEM is a student-led organization that focuses on STEM careers for women. Our club includes the UAGC Women in Technology International Chapter, better known as WITI, and the UAGC chapter of Girls Who Code, College Loop. Today we're going to talk about building your legacy. But before we can talk about that, we must define it. So what is a legacy? Well, Merriam-Webster describes it as something that is handed down from our ancestors, predecessors, or from the past. So today we're going to learn how to build from experiences of our speakers. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready to hear their stories. But before we can listen, I would like to thank you again for joining us, and I will pass it over to our officers to introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carrie Seuss, Vice President.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mayan Colden, and I am the Secretary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yam Mitchell, and I'm your Communication Officer.
And hello, everyone. I am Dr. Karen Lynn Daniels-Ivy. I am the Department Chair of our Technology Studies organization. We are so excited about this webinar today. Oh my goodness, we are in a position to hear from a set of legacy pioneers who have been extremely helpful, beneficial, successful within their STEM walks today. One once said that your legacy grows with each new experience, and we are in for a wonderful experience today. So take notes and sit back and you will gain something for sure. This webinar is a historical gathering of legacy STEM pioneers. Thank you to all of our panelists who will be speaking on the panel today. And also thank you to the historically Black colleges and universities who are joining us today. Throughout the webinar, we'll have you to place in chat hello, so later on we can recognize you, your name, and the name of your HBCU in attending. And so without any further delay, I would like to welcome to the mic Carrie, who will introduce to us our speakers for the event today. Carrie, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ivy. Again, good afternoon and welcome. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our esteemed speakers. While I share their accomplishments, Mayan will post in the chat full bios on each speaker. Our final speaker, Captain Willie Daniels, was fascinated with aviation from an early age and eventually majored in aviation, completing his degree at the Metropolitan State College of Denver. His first airline job was as a flight attendant with United Airlines. In the meantime, he built his flying time and finally landed a position as a pilot with United. He advanced through the ranks and is currently a B777 captain flying international routes. He is the founding CEO of Shades of Blue, which fosters STEM education in the minority community. He is now the president of Shades of Blue. I hope you're looking forward to learning from our speakers as much as I am. I now pass on the mic to Dr. Karen Ivy.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks for all of the background on our excellent speakers for today. I'm going to pass the mic over to Mayan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Women in STEM. Next, we'll have Captain Willie Daniels to speak next.
Wow, I'm deeply honored to be on this panel with such distinguishing guests today. And I'm standing on the shoulders of these giants of the aviation and aerospace industries. And I would like to take a few minutes to tell a little bit of my story on how I became intertwined with these great legends of our nation. I was born in 1955 in Kansas City, Kansas, and my family moved to Palmdale, California, near Edwards Air Force Base in 1957, a year before NASA was formed in 1958. And shortly after that, NASA selected the first 7 astronauts, the Mercury 7 astronauts, who were stationed out at Edwards Air Force Base. Amongst them were the first 3 astronauts, Alan Shepard, who became the first to fly in space on May 15th, 1961, and Gus Grissom, who flew on July 21st, 1961, and then John Glenn, who flew in February of 1962. And I have a story after we moved to Pomona, California from the Palmdale area, and I would ask my mother, because I heard about the launch of John Glenn, which was going to be the first orbital flight going all the way around the world. And the first 2 with Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom was pretty much a suborbital flight. They do a parabolic arc, they go up and then they turn around and they come right straight back down. But John Glenn was the first that was going to do a total flight around the world. And I asked my mother, Mom, if I go to bed, I do all my homework and I go to bed early, would you wake me up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning so I could watch that launch into space? And I went to bed extra early that night and she woke me up. And sure enough, in 1962, I was able to watch John Glenn in his historic flight for the first time as an astronaut going completely around the world. Now, living over in the Palmdale area, as a small child, I would go outside and play with my family and friends. And every now and then we would hear a sonic boom going off. And I'd look up into the sky and I could see these contrails as they raced across the skies. But unbeknownst to me, at that time, it was folks like Colonel Chuck Yeager, who was the commander of the astronaut training school, and Captain Ed Dwight, and others out there breaking the sound barrier. Now, as a small child, one of the things that happened to us, I had a lot of brothers and sisters. I had 9 brothers and sisters, and we, as growing up out in the Southern California area, my father would load us all up in his station wagon, and he'd have us count out 1 through 10 to make sure that we were all still there at the same time. But then we'd head off to maybe Edwards Air Force Base or over to Palmdale Airport or Mojave Airport, where he would take us off to air show. And for the first time, this is where I got the love for airplanes. I would see these airplanes flying in the skies, people jumping out of airplanes and the whole works. And this is where I fell in love at the time with wanting to learn how to fly. Now, growing up in the 60s, each year we would return back to Kansas City to visit my grandparents and my other family members. And my grandmother had a photograph of a young man on her living room table posing in his football uniform with a football in his hands. And my grandmother would say to me, "See that young man? He's an astronaut." That young man was Ed Dwight. He was a good friend of my family as they grew up in Kansas City. In 1962, Ed was selected by President John F. Kennedy to become the first African-American astronaut candidate, only to be removed from the program after the Kennedy's assassination in 1963. And Ed can tell you a little bit more about his story when he comes on. But the next candidate to be selected in the program was actually Major Robert Lawrence, who in 1967 was selected. And unfortunately, he passed away in an F-104 starfighter supersonic jet aircraft accident out of Edwards Air Force Base. And as I continued to grow up in the 60s and the 70s, I'm looking for role models, because I would tell my brothers and sisters were always asking me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be an astronaut. They looked at me and laughed and said that you're not going to be an astronaut, you're going to be an astronaut. And so, because that was the thing that they were talking about, going into space was crazy. And so in 1962, when we moved there to Pomona, California, I attended elementary school, junior high, high school, and attended college at Mount San Antonio College. And I was a commercial pilot major. And in 1976, I transferred from Mount San Antonio College over to Metropolitan State College in Denver, and where I became a professional pilot major. And one of my courses, I had an instructor. And this was back in 1977 by this time at Metro. And my instructor had announced that he had a special guest that he had invited to speak at our class the following week. And it turned out the two of these individuals had been test pilots together out of test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base. And this guest speaker turned out to be Mr. Ed Dwight. And after his visit and speech to my class, I introduced myself to Mr. Dwight and told him that he didn't know me, but he knew my family because he grew up with them in Kansas City. And I told him that I was very interested in becoming an astronaut. And he invited me to his home, and he gave me an application to apply for an astronaut position with NASA. And shortly after that, submitting my application, I received a rejection letter from NASA. Unlike with Ron, I received this rejection letter, and it was pretty devastating to me. There was a certain criteria that one needed to have. First of all, you needed to have graduated from college. I was still enrolled in college. And you had to have some type of engineering degree that could be used in the space program that would have been beneficial to working and operating in space. And also one of the big things, it wasn't required, but one of the big things is, had you gone to test pilot school? And I had none of those in my repertoire. You know, I found myself while I was in college on a path to become an airline pilot and not on a path to be an astronaut. And the main reason for that is at the time, there was not a lot of role models out there for me to follow. And shortly after this, unbeknownst to me, or shortly before this, unbeknownst to me, NASA had contracted with an American actress by the name of Miss Nichelle Nichols of Star Trek. And she was also known as Lieutenant Uhura, you know. And Nichelle Uhura, or actually Nichelle Nichols, had worked on the series of Star Trek in the early to mid 60s, and she was considering getting off. And she ran into Dr. Martin Luther King, and she asked Martin Luther King about she was going to leave this program, and he told her that she needed to stay in there. And she said, why? And because she represented African Americans in a television program that basically represented a multinational crew on board the Enterprise of Star Trek. And Nichelle went on, NASA had contracted with her to help them recruit the very first class of space shuttle astronauts. And in that class, you had Dr. Guion Bluford, Dr. Ronald McNair, and Colonel Fred Gregory, who unfortunately, Fred's on holiday with his family and wasn't able to join us today. And they just recently named a building at the Air Force Academy in his honor, Gregory Hall. And Dr. Bluford, Ron McNair, and Colonel Gregory were all in that first class. And the second class was Charlie Bolden, and to be followed by the fifth African-American astronaut was Dr. Mae Jemison, when she was selected. And so, as I mentioned, there was not a lot of role models for me to follow. And so after graduating from Metropolitan State College in 1978, as a professional pilot major, I hired on with United Airlines within a week of my graduation, not as a pilot, but as a flight attendant. And I used this opportunity to get my foot in the door in order to use it as a stepping stone to get into the cockpit for United. And during that time frame, I flew as a flight attendant for about 8 years, and then I transitioned into the cockpit, where I started out on the Boeing 727, and I worked as an instructor for United, as a recruiter for United. I transitioned over to the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. I went to the Boeing 747-400, where I flew that for 19 years out of Los Angeles, pretty much all over the world. And then I transitioned over to the Boeing 777 as a captain. And I have fortunately had an opportunity in a few of my flights. I had General Charlie Bolden on a couple of my flights. One was out of Japan to Los Angeles, and another one was out of Paris, France, back to Washington, D.C. And then ultimately I retired off of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And this was after 42 years of service with United Airlines. I have recently returned to United Airlines, working on an operations center out of Denver International Airport, helping with the smooth flow of flights coming in and out of Denver. 1980, I joined a group of airline pilots that had formed an organization called ASAP. And ASAP stood for the American Society of Aerospace Pilots. And this group of pilots wanted to see what the feasibility of airline pilots flying from transitioning from flying airline jets to flying the space shuttle. And we were being heavily courted by NASA at this point in time. And one of my trips was down to the Johnson Space Center when I had a chance to meet Charles Bolden for the first time at the Johnson Space Center over in Houston. And since then, we have remained in contact with each other over the years, and that's going over 40 years at the present time. In 1999, alongside of other airline pilots and engineers and scientists and educators, I founded an organization called Shades of Blue, which is an aviation aerospace foundation dedicated to helping build the future workforce for the country. And to date, we have worked with thousands and thousands of students to inspire them to pursue careers in the fields of aviation and aerospace. And just to name a few that we have been a part of here recently, one of the young men just spent 6 months on orbit on Expedition 64 of SpaceX, Mr. Victor Glover, who just returned back in May after being up in space on the International Space Station. We have another young lady, Miss Corinne Gatto Stano, and she's now a rocket propulsion engineer working on propulsion. She did the Mars 2020 program, and now she's working on a project to go to Europa, to burrow down into the oceans of Europa to look for life in the oceans of Europa. And I formed this organization because at the time, I found that there was not a lot of role models out there for me to put me on a path to become an astronaut, which was my ultimate goal. But now, after becoming an airline pilot and being in the industry for over 42 years, I know what it takes to become an airline pilot. I know what it takes to become an astronaut. I know what it takes to be an engineer and a scientist. And we are working to help build that future workforce by inspiring these young people in the areas of STEAM and STEAM++, which stand for science, technology, engineering, arts, math. And in 2016, as noted by General Bolden, NASA added the D for design because they want people to think about designing aircraft and designing spacecraft and what it's going to take for us to be able to fly to Mars, send people to Mars, not on a one-way trip, but to bring them back here to the Earth in one piece. And so these are the things that we are doing with my organization to help inspire. And by having these heroes and sheroes, and I thought it was great to have Cheryl tell a little bit about herself as a spouse, because a lot of times we have a tendency to look at the tip of the spear, and the spouses are those individuals behind those astronauts that are going up in space, and they are usually overlooked. And so the roles that they play as wives, as mothers, as supporters of those astronauts is huge. And you know, Cheryl, my hat's off to you for the years that you have worked with Ron and the Dream Foundation on that. It's amazing that that you're still going and supporting that. And just to be on this panel with all of you heroes and sheroes, to me, is a huge, wonderful experience for me. And it's something that I hope the young people, the students out there across the world will listen to this opportunity and follow in our footsteps. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to be here on your panel.
Thank you for speaking and sharing your story, Captain Willie.
Thank you, Mayan. And thank you to all our STEM pioneers for sharing your experience with us. I am Lisa Sims, the lead faculty advisor for the Women in STEM. And I know everybody has just been blessed to hear about how our panelists have persevered through their STEM careers, and that has motivated us and encouraged us to do more and to not give up on our journey. And I just want to thank them for being here, and I thank you for being here as well. And I want to encourage you to join the Women in STEM. We have 2 ways that you can do that. You can join either via UAGC Connect, or you can also join via our LinkedIn group, and I will go ahead and put that in the chat. And so that way you can be a part of our organization and you can stay abreast of our events that will be going on, so that you won't miss exciting webinars such as this one. And then also I want to invite you to go ahead and save the date for October the 29th from 1 p.m. Pacific time to 2:30 Pacific time. We're going to have our cybersecurity awareness event, and we're going to have panelists from Microsoft who are going to speak to us about different areas of cybersecurity, such as the dark web and other cybersecurity areas that we may or may not be aware of. So I highly want to encourage you to join us there, and I will put the flyer for that event also in the chat so that you can have that and you can go ahead and register for that event. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And we once again thank everyone who attended. We thank our STEM pioneers, and we thank our attendees for tuning in and stay abreast of what's coming next for the Women in STEM. And remember to continue to persevere. And even though you have obstacles, you can overcome those obstacles to do greatness. And so with that, stay blessed and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, all of our panelists. And we want to also give a special thank you to all of our historical Black colleges and universities who attended with us today. Florida, FMU, thank you for attending, and others who may not have spotted your name in the chat. Thanks to everyone who attended, all of our panelists as well.